Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's Wednesday Wise webinar, and thank you to Netsertive for sponsoring today on local digital advertising strategies for national marketing teams, 10 lessons learned from 10,000 campaigns. A reminder to everyone that we are recording this webinar and it will be made available on community.franchise.org within about 48 hours. As well, if you have any questions for today's speakers, please put them into the Q&A box and they'll get to them at the end of the content. So I'm going to kick it over to Pete Durand, Chief Revenue Officer with Netsertive, to say a little bit about the company, introduce the other speakers for today, and get us into the content. Pete?
Thanks so much. We're happy to be here and be sponsoring this event. We've participated in previous Wednesday Wise webinars and had great success. So I'm joined by two of the smartest people at Netsertive, Lindsay Kovacs and Tyler Strange. Tyler's titles are there. So Lindsay heads up our client success team in our brand side of our business. And Tyler's probably one of our most senior enterprise program managers in the brand side of the business as well. He's been doing this a long time. So 10,000 campaigns, they've actually lived it, breathed it, had nightmares about them, but they're here to share some of their insights from those campaigns. So we'll jump into that in a minute. I'm going to give a brief overview of Netsertive, not to go too much into a sales pitch, but it's probably important to understand what we do and why the way we run campaigns is unique for franchisees and franchise networks. I think that's important. So let's jump on into that right now and talk about it. So we're a complete full service digital agency, but we've got a little bit of a twist. We've got a really high power technology platform that sits behind Tyler and Lindsay and a bunch of performance campaign specialists. So as mentioned, we've run tens of thousands of campaigns and billions of dollars of media, but the way we run that media is pretty unique. So our company got started in 2009 and our technologies continue to evolve. So what does it mean when we say a full service agency? So, we're specialized in PPC, display, social video, e-com, connected TV, and landing pages. E-com and CTV have really become a hot thing for us recently. A lot of customers are asked for them. And I think, 2020 was a year where people realized that they didn't have a blended e-commerce strategy, a CTV strategy, as well as a physical strategy around the locations they were losing. So we're able to bring that all to the forefront for our clients, both at the network level. So if you're a franchisor and you're thinking about your hundreds or thousands of locations, or if you're an individual franchisee, we have the ability to impact both of you in a strong way. So the way we do this is, I think you'll hear most agencies talk about the fact that they do a really good job, creating their campaigns, measuring performance. We do all those things as well. But how we configure the campaigns on the front end and the data we show you is much different than you'll see. So I think Tyler and Lindsay are going to drill down to that a little bit. And to set the stage, let's talk about the fact that we really have built out what we call an omni-channel. And some people don't recognize the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel. Multi-channel used to mean, people had a Google search strategy and they could get by with that. Well, you can't have just one channel, one network strategy. You have to be participating in all aspects of a customer's digital journey because they're going to meander around, particularly in the area we specialize, which is large considered purchases, right? If you're going to remodel a bathroom or spend a lot of money on a couch or buy a car, you're going to do your research and you're going to do it in multiple channels. So your content and all of your assets, both visual and audio and written, have to be everywhere your customers are going to be looking, and they have to be customized to where they're actually going to get that product or service, which means around your locations. That's different. And you're going to end up tweaking that differently for each one of those locations in a way you probably hadn't realized before. Regional campaigns, national campaigns, not nearly as effective. So when you think about how this works and you think about the multiplier effect, you have all those different channels and networks, you have different products or services you might be selling, and then you have a whole bunch of locations. So we have some customers, we might get into this with Tyler and Lindsay, who will recognize that one particular product or service does really, really well in search. It also does really, really well in a couple of particular locations, but it doesn't do the same, it doesn't have the same performance in other locations. Maybe display is better for that, or a different product or service. They've never had that visibility down to the location level. And that information is very, very powerful. In fact, Tyler is responsible for driving a lot of reporting strategy side of our company to provide this information for our customers. So he's going to share some of that experience as well. And then really what we're going to get into is how this works over time. So our team, if it's a market or a network we've not participated in, does a tremendous amount of research, and we share that with you. And that will determine budgets, campaign structure, And we'll go back and forth on why we think those things are important. If it is a market we've participated in, so for example, auto or furniture, we've been doing that for 10 years. We can light up a furniture store and it performs incredibly well in hours because it learns from every other campaign we've done for the previous 10 years. And it always is learning. So that upfront opportunities is strong for customers, particularly if you've launched, your first 5 locations in your network. The next 5 or 10 are going to do even better faster. So that Tyler's going to drill into that later on in the presentation. We measure the heck out of this, and then we continue to tune. We have customers who have been running campaigns for 10 years, evergreen campaigns for 10 years. We tune those 800 to 1,000 times a month. And they're still driving improvements in ROI and return on ad spend after a 10-year period. The reason that's important is your competition has changed in that marketplace, the demographic has changed, the products and services have changed. So it never just sits idle, it always has to consistently learn. So without any further ado, let's introduce the stars of the show, Tyler and Lindsay, and we'll jump into the first couple lessons that they've learned. And if you have questions, pipe it in. I can see that. And if necessary, I'll interrupt Tyler and Lindsay, or we'll save them to the end. So let's get started. All right, Lindsay, I'm going to start with you first. So one of the lessons you wanted to share was digital advertising programs are a people-first affair. What does that mean? I mean, what do you mean by people first?
Sure. So definitely something we see and you guys are well aware of in franchise network level marketing. There's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of people involved on multiple levels, and everybody has goals and things that are important to them. And so one of the things that I know I've seen in working with some of the franchises that I've worked with is just making sure that both goals are being met and ultimately that the franchisees are being heard. Just one example that really stuck out when I was thinking about this is actually a program where we are on our second pilot with this company. It was a pre-COVID and post-COVID type thing. And we had a lot of learnings the first round where from the brand or franchise level, there were a lot of expectations and things that needed to be upheld. And we identified some opportunities where on the local level, the local franchisees just didn't feel like they were being heard. And so I think taking that learning and really seeing that and taking that to heart, these are people involved in business. As we've launched the second pilot, we've scheduled calls with both the franchise level and the franchisees. And we really found that really they're on the same page and they want to accomplish the same thing. They just want to make sure they're heard and their local level is being supported. So I guess that's what I would mean by that, Pete.
Yeah, and I remember this campaign, Lindsay, and I think one of the things that we learned in parallel with both the brand as well as the different locations was the brand didn't have a lot of recognition. And I think that was challenging for the individual locations. And that was the message they were trying to say is, look, our competition has very strong brand awareness. We don't, so we need help there. And I know you and the team put together a very complex campaign strategy that involved landing pages for both the locations, the network, and strategies in 3 or 4 different channels. So it was really a complex formula. And after time, it started to do exactly what the locations wanted to do, which is drive that brand awareness, start to increase form fills and phone calls. And that was ultimately the goal.
Yep. One thing I'll add about that, Pete, that I think was extremely valuable at the end of the pilot is I think it helps strengthen the relationship between some of the local dealers or franchisees and the brand, because they really saw the value in what the brand or franchise level was delivering within their local market. So definitely very beneficial.
It was also a great way to measure what they were challenged with, which was brand awareness. They hadn't figured out how to measure that at a local level, and we gave them that data, which is great.
Exactly.
Thanks, Lindsay. That's awesome. Let's go on to our second lesson learned from 10,000 different campaigns. And Lindsay, this one's for you as well. Tyler can chime in, but local employee processes, this is an interesting concept, determine conversion and ROI. We were quite frankly shocked at what you guys discovered here.
Yeah, so it goes without saying, conversions happen online. We see those in multiple forms, just depending on how your website and social channels are set up. So they could just be form fills, calls coming in. Ultimately, technology can help with that. We're able to capture those leads that come in either through your website or, as I said, social channels, call tracking, those things. But ultimately, what we find is, it's so important for how those leads are handled. We can drive leads on a local level all day, but if they're not being handled properly within the local business, they're just not going to close. One really important example that came to mind was we were brought in to do a pilot for 4 locations for a pest control company. And really the difference right away was just transparency and proactive campaign management. Both the franchise and the franchisees loved that we were able to show attribution across all channels and really see the leads that were being driven. But we actually discovered a huge disconnect with how their calls were being managed and routed into their own business. So it turns out 40% of their calls that came in were actually going unanswered, whereas their internal reporting was only showing 6%. And so being able to handle that and help them better reroute their calls and just handle their calls on the sales side much better ultimately resulted in more sales.
That's true, Tyler. I know we've got a story in a customer we participated in where we turned this on, and they actually had to call us after a couple of days and say, turn it off, we can't handle the volume. And we flooded them with leads and calls, and they weren't ready for it, which triggered a standard operating procedure for all of our future pilots, is to make sure that we did an audit of their ability to accept phone calls and form fills. Isn't that right, Tyler?
That's right. Yeah, it's crazy how, if you aren't reaching a potential customer in a way that you're unfamiliar with, it's crazy how quickly those can come in, and it recognizes, opportunities within your own business. I think that's something that, you don't necessarily think of when you think of marketing, but weaknesses and strengths of your own business come out quickly, which is great. It's a good way to improve overall.
Yeah, it was one of those tough lessons we had to learn, because it really upset everybody because they weren't prepared for it and nobody told them this was coming. So it was something we learned along the way to make sure that the communication, as Lindsay described, into that location so they understand what's about to happen. So a really valuable lesson. I appreciate that. All right, Tyler, this one's for you. So the listen and learn across your network locations. I think the next couple of points, you're going to drill down to some things you've learned that were really important. So why don't you share what that listen and learn aspect means?
Yeah, so I'd say probably the greatest benefit of having a comprehensive marketing plan or having a lot of individual franchisees within one network is that network effect. You take those quick learnings and optimizations, and it's essentially, if you were to work with an agency by yourself, there's a lot of learning that has to be done that is on your own. You're essentially starting from scratch. Whereas with a network effect, where let's say you have 25 locations that are all working together, all of that data is feeding in simultaneously. So it allows us to make decisions and optimizations quickly. It saves unnecessary ad spend. Perhaps a certain service or feature doesn't work well in a particular market that is similar to a new market that you're bringing on. That learning can be applied really quickly and allow you to make sure that your advertising dollars are focused in the right areas.
Right.
It allows us to get up to speed quickly too. For any new location that is brought on, those learnings and capabilities are be able to be applied immediately, kind of like what you spoke to earlier, Pete.
Yeah, and I think back to another example, when we light up a furniture store or a furniture reseller for furniture franchise, we've been doing that, and we have this technology called a pod, right, which is the data set that sits behind our platform that captures all the keywords, the ad groups, negative keywords, et cetera. And it's funny, we might have 1 million keywords in our ottoman pod, right? You want to buy a couch or an ottoman, there's 1 million keywords we developed over 10 years. So next time we light up a furniture location, we flip it on, point to that pod, there's 10 years of learnings there. That wouldn't happen if they were dealing with their own agency locally, and the franchise network wouldn't be able to benefit that across all their different locations. So that sharing and learning across locations is so important. A question came in to the previous slide that I want to just pull back in, which I think is a great question. Tyler, when we discovered that we overwhelmed that location with calls and form fills, the question they asked is, did we start doing secret shopping? And the answer is yes, we did. That's how we started auditing it, because we could take their word for it, but we actually went out and did it ourselves, right?
That's right. That's right. So we, we used it as both an internal and external coaching opportunity. Identifying, hey, we're generating a lot of these calls, but it's taking 4 minutes for somebody to answer the phone. I don't want to say that ad dollar is going to waste, but essentially it's going to waste. You're creating a roadblock for your customer, which is not what you want.
Right.
So it allowed us to open their eyes to an opportunity that they may not have been aware of, which is really nice.
Yeah, we actually hired an intern, and their job was full time to go, and they actually basically did an audit, and they would produce data. Here's how typically I waited for somebody to pick up my call, return my call. Here's how many times I went through a phone tree. Here's how long I waited for a response in a form fill. And we were able to share that data back to the customer. Tyler was a big advocate about operational improvements inside those organizations, and who doesn't want better customer service? So that secret shopping was an important aspect of it. All right, thanks, Tyler. That's great. Let's go to the next question here. So speed to market matters. Let's talk about that. I think it's not necessarily what we think it means, isn't that right, Lindsay? Talk about what you mean by speed to market.
Yeah, and I think you guys kind of touched on this a little bit already in the previous slide, but it's just so valuable to have that data set. And so when you have new locations that want to come on, we've already figured a lot of that out, right? So there's almost a playbook that's put together to say, here's what we have learned in this network that works. Here's what we've learned that doesn't work. And so, not only can we launch individual locations much faster, but we can do it more efficiently, which I know is a huge win on all levels to be able to start driving leads in a timely fashion. As Pete mentioned, we service a lot of customers and work with a lot of partners that are more considered purchases. So any way we can help shorten that, client life cycle and drive leads faster is a huge importance.
Yeah, and I think, Lindsay, some of the things we've learned the hard way there are there's a verbal aspect of that playbook, and there's a written aspect of that playbook. So we've learned during our sales process that oftentimes a webinar up front with that network, inviting as many franchisees as possible to learn about the program, and then really summarizing it into a clean one-pager that says, here's the program overview, here are the key aspects of the program, here's what the participation requirements are, cost, especially, and here's the expected deliverables and outcomes. And that way, when you and Tyler and your peers get on the phone with a new location, there's a couple things that they can take away from that. I understand what I'm getting into. And then Tyler has been really big about driving, as have you been, Lindsay, about showing them what expected results are. And I think the important thing there is they can walk before they run. A lot of our customers, and both of you can comment, Tyler, particularly you, are somewhat shocked when they can learn how much they should be spending in their market in different channels. We have some customers that might be spending $30,000 or $40,000 on digital around an individual location. And when another location comes on board, another franchisee, and they haven't been spending money on anything digitally, they're shocked to learn that. And the only way to get them there is to show them really the ROI, right? If this person puts a quarter in, we give them a whole lot of quarters back, and they can get started at a much lower spend. And then that data shows them that positive impact, and they start to ramp up their spend accordingly. And again, we don't have people spend more money than they should. The ROI is the key measurement, right? We don't want to spend more money if the ROI continues to go down. So Tyler, any comments or thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and each market is different. I know we'll get into this in a few lessons learned from now, but adapting a marketing campaign specific to each location is vital, because what location A needs is probably not what location B needs. Perhaps location A can receive 20 times the leads location B can. So it's really just adapting and figuring out what the right ROI is for each individual location, keeping in mind the corporate goal.
Absolutely right. All right, on to number 5. We're halfway through and there's a math problem. Tyler promised me there'd be no math, but there is. So central control plus localization, and that drives brand equity and results. And again, this is one of those things that our technology gives us the ability to do this at scale. But I think there's a little bit of the black art part of it, which is what Lindsay and Tyler bring to the table about describing how important this is. So Tyler, walk us through the abacus math here and tell us what we're learning in this slide.
Yeah, so the big thing here, and a lot of what both franchisors and franchisees struggle with is brand compliance on both ends. The brand or the organization struggles with ensuring that their corporate initiatives and values and even branding, images, assets, all of those things are pushed consistently throughout the network. And then on the flip side, it's important for each individual franchisee to remain brand compliant and promoting the corporate message while still tailoring that to their local market. So we're here to help here. So it kind of speaks back to that network effect. Sure. The ability to not only ensure that brand compliance is being pushed among the campaigns, but also making sure that each of those franchisees doesn't have to worry about going outside and having an issue with their corporate organization by doing something outside the box that's not approved. So our campaigns allow that consistency, which is a really good thing.
It's a great point. One of the questions that came in the side, and I would answer it now, but we're going to get to it in one of the last slides, is when we talk about ROI and we talk about showing a network and even an individual franchisee, what are we talking about? What are we measuring? So I'm going to table that to the last one. I just want that person to know we did see the question come in, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. But this localization aspect of it, I think it's important when you start talking about some of the things we bring to the table, which is the ability to blend this omni-channel approach between search, display, video, social, and CTV. When you see an asset show up with a local phone number, an address, or website on your screen, it triggers a different reaction when you see a 1-800 number, right? So that's what we do. And then the ability for someone potentially to search for a particular couch in their phone, get back and sit down in front of the TV and have that particular couch show up on a CTV ad with a local store with inventory in that particular cutout, that's where it becomes powerful, and that's where true omni-channel approach comes in play. You can't do that without proper localization and without the proper platform. So I think that's a great point that Tyler is driving there. Let's talk about number 6 here and see what that looks like. So localize your campaign in media planning, and I think that's the perfect segue from what we were just talking about. Lindsay, what does that mean when you talk about localizing it all the way down to the specific media planning, maybe population, strengths, weaknesses, demographics? What are the things you're looking at when you localize a campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're not looking at the local level and planning on the local level, and you're just throwing dollars out there, you're basically shooting in the dark. I think it's really important to understand, I mean, to Tyler's point, we see this all the time where different markets may require different budgets. They may require different strategies, even within the same network. And so I think it's just taking a look at that and kind of mapping it over time, but really, number one, making sure that budget is relative based on the population, different weaknesses where your customers may be misinformed. I have a perfect example of this where a company I worked with a few years ago had, locations kind of all over the country. And we found that, the majority of where their locations were in the Northeast was actually where they had the least amount of brand awareness. And so that was one place that we really needed to say, hey, I know you want to drive sales in this local market and in this part of the country, but we really need to focus efforts. And so that's where building more brand awareness and adding extra display assets or doing a little bit more social media targeting really was a huge value to that brand to be able to focus that based on that learning. A few other things to just think about, obviously every market is a little different, but even taking a look at different, which I just kind of touched on, but different channels work better in different markets. And also based on the type of business. So display consideration works really well for one of our partners that I know Tyler works with very closely. And, with some of ours, like the pilot I was talking about, that's more of a B2B, that works really great on LinkedIn. And so just taking those things into consideration as well.
Those are great points. And when you talk about the different types of channels and maybe changing the budgets and focus in those channels, one of our audience members, Judy, came in and said, what do you mean by CTV, which I mentioned in the previous slide. So I'm going to pause quickly there and just potentially describe that. We've actually done 2 or 3 webinars just on CTV, which we call connected TV. Connected TV really is you viewing, let's say Hulu or YouTube TV or Amazon, what I'll call, you've disconnected your cable box and now you're watching TV over the internet, right? And CTV pretty much means the box in your family room. There's another thing called OTT, which could mean any one of the platforms. It could mean your phone, a tablet, a computer. But when we talk about CTV, we're really talking about that experience where for the first time ever, the number of people that have cut the cord are greater than the people who actually subscribe to cable subscribers. So that those assets, that inventory that's available is potentially untapped, and you have direct control over that ad and who it is shown to versus typical broadcast or cable TV. And when you blend it with an integrated omni-channel campaign, as I mentioned before, you can start to target audiences a very unique way. So connected TV, we have a lot more information on our website if you'd like to learn more about that. That is, I think, our fastest growing segment right now, where customers are really paying a lot of attention to how they get involved with that because they can measure things so much more effectively. So that's great, Lindsay. Thanks for that comment. Let's jump into number 7 and see what that does for us here as well. So localizing your ad copy and creative. We touched on this a little bit. Tyler, I'd like you to talk about some of the things we've learned from an ad copy perspective, what works best, and then some of the nuances we've learned on localizing not only ad copy and creative, but potentially maybe some things about landing pages here as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, this is another layer of, it goes one step further than just localizing the campaign. So obviously we need to target the specific market that is relevant to the specific location. But in terms of like ad copy and creative, it can vary from market to market and what coordinates well with that particular customer. So there's certain phrasing that may work well in one location that doesn't work in the other. But going back to that collective learning, we can adapt and move faster based off of similar markets, whether it's demographics that are similar, geography that's similar, population size. All of those things are taken into consideration as we are adjusting the ad copy, knowing that we need to keep that overall brand compliant messaging and imaging, as a part of it. So that goes one step further. Now, in terms of applying it to landing pages, it's the same effect. You want to have that user experience for the customer to feel as if they are visiting, a business in their backyard and they're shopping local. That's important, and we've applied that in a number of areas where we've created, a landing page scenario for each individual location with unique ad copy, unique imaging, all of that to make sure that it's tailored to the specific customer at the right time, at the right place, to ensure that you're closing as many of those opportunities that you have.
It's a good point. I think when you talk about some of the nuances in some of the ad copy, even some of the words we're targeting, there are differences in the way people, I'll just use an example, janitorial services, right? So in the Northeast, people might look for sanitization or disinfectant. In the Southeast, they might look for, custodian, right? So, and we learned that over time. We learn what keywords are responding, and it's amazing when we share that data with our clients. They typically started off with a very narrow target and focus list, which is great, right? You don't want to waste money. But we realized we could expand and drive more traffic because they had other services they did want to sell to these customers that we weren't aware of initially. So once we started changing the landing pages, identifying what words were responding to, we drove a lot more conversion because we recognized their audience was a little broader and we could change some of their focus and their keywords. So that's a great point, Tyler. I see a couple more questions coming in here, so I'm going to see if I can scroll up and see what those look like. All right, let's go to number 8 and make sure that we're staying on track here. All right, so calls are critical for local franchises. What do we mean by that?
Sure. So I know we've talked about calls a little bit, but I just think there's so much value in tracking calls that are coming through your ads, and obviously important from a lead perspective and customer service perspective, but when you have these calls that you can look back on and really say, how did this look like for our customer? I think there's a few things you can take away. Number one, like we kind of identified already, I've been in a leadership role before. You try to hire the best people you can, but you can't be there all the time. And so I think it's a great tool to be able to go back and just have coaching conversations with the team. So this would, of course, be more of a benefit on the local level, but like we've already said, it can help close the gap and really be able to increase your conversion rate based on the leads that come in, and just help have those conversations with your team. In addition, I think this kind of goes into what Pete was just saying about, different terms in different markets. I see this a lot in industries where there's a lot of buzzwords that happen, industry terms, ergonomic seating, different things. That's just one that comes to mind to me, but that's not typically what the general consumer is searching for. And so one of the things that I always ask my customers, not only initially, but ongoing, is what are your actual customers or prospects calling in and asking for? Sometimes the business owner doesn't know. That's fine. You guys wear a lot of hats. But that way, if you have these calls, you can go back and listen and say, you know what, this person called for surround sound, but we've been targeting high-end audio. And so being able to use that terminology and put it back into your campaign is so valuable at the end of the day.
Yeah, those are important tips. And I think understanding the call tracking, Tyler, we've had customers, we've had to audit hundreds and hundreds of calls, and that information is so important. We've also been able to help them figure out, in general, why are people calling into their offices, right? So what we determined was the small percentage that were actually looking for a new service. Many of those people are trying to get a hold of their sister-in-law who works at the front desk, or asking another service question. So they realized they had an existing customer opportunity to upsell, cross-sell, and service better versus just the marketing aspect. So we were driving a lot more conversions, might be an interesting word to describe it, but people were finding our ads much more than they were finding their actual organic content. So it was really important way for them to try to change their overall digital structure. It's great. Okay, let's see here. Oh, back up to number 9. I want to skip that one. So this one of the questions that came in earlier about ROI. What are we measuring? So both of you guys can chime in here. When we think about keeping the metrics simple and looking at it from a network-wide perspective, what are we looking at from a reporting standpoint and ROI standpoint? How do we make sure that data jives with the customer? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I'll start. I think one of the big initiatives we have early on with any campaign or any partnership with any franchise is that we want to establish what the goals are early and often, and not just the corporate goals, but also those individual localized goals. With that being said, keeping that reporting simple and consistent across the network does allow us to generate that consistency, notice trends, and say, kind of back to Pete's point earlier, if search is working really, really well in a market and it has the highest ROI, what is that market doing differently that another market that isn't succeeding very well? What can we change there to adapt? So I think establishing those goals and what, what's important to each individual franchise and franchisee is the way we do it. Today, and I think in most cases, depending on what business you're in, ROI is our end goal. We want to make sure that you are getting money in return for the investment that you're putting into your digital advertising. So in terms of how we set that up, it varies by each market, but establishing those goals early and often is really important. I don't know if Lindsay, you had anything to add to that. Or Pete.
The only thing I would add, I think you hit the nail on the head, but one thing I'll also add that I think is extremely valuable is, Pete mentioned kind of an omni-channel approach is really important to reach all of your customers. And I know as we, in the past have worked with new partners and they go away from doing, maybe they worked with other agencies and you could work with, on a big level, 25 different agencies to do all of the things that you do, from creative to social to other types of PPC and more organic type stuff. And it can be hard to visualize when you're doing so much and with so many different people. And so I think also just being able to drive in and have that reporting in one centralized location is it's huge and extremely valuable when you're looking at the overall goal, what's impactful, what's not, and to be able to roll that out on individual levels.
A great point, both Lindsay and Tyler. I'll go back to the question that our viewer asked about, what metrics are we measuring? And I'm going to talk about a nuance that we've chosen at Netsertive that might be a bit different than you've heard before. So a lot of the metrics or the outcomes that a traditional agency would give you, we don't consider to be outcomes. We call them tuning metrics. So that's what our team, Tyler, Lindsay, and the operational performance team behind them look at. And that's the standard stuff: impressions, click-through rate, landing page visits, time, dwell time, conversion rate, cost per click, see all those different things. Those are tuning metrics. That's not a lead. It's not a phone call. It's not a customer. It's a tuning metric. So when Tyler and the team build out ROI, what they talk about is they'll sit down with a customer and say, how much do you sell this particular product service for? How much margin do you make in that particular product service? And then we build a pretty extensive table. And then we have conversions, right? So sometimes both the client and us don't know the exact conversion rate, which is when someone does a form fill, how many of those people actually go to the appointment, right? And then when the people go to the appointment, how many people actually buy the product or service? So those are typically things customers sometimes have themselves. They know those exact conversion rates. We model that out for them, and we'll say, we're going to get X percentage of the people to view this, click this, fill out a form or make a phone call, and then we'll show them what the return on ad spend is based on the conversion, whatever that meant, but we'll also show them what the return on investment is. And the return on investment is lower than the ROAS. It's going to be. But we have customers that see, there are some customers, and Lindsay can comment on this as well, a return on ad spend of 3 would be phenomenal. We have some customers who see 25 or 30. It depends on your market, your network, the typical price of the product or service, the competition in that particular market. And oftentimes our team, Tyler and Lindsay, will give a customer what seems to be counterintuitive advice. I love this when we tell a customer, you're actually gonna have to drive your ROAS down for a period of time to drive your ROI up. What they mean by that is you got to build more brand awareness. We're going to change those conversion properties, but your ROI is going to increase in the long term, because what we mean by that is that display or awareness campaign feeds the search campaign 2 to 3 months down the road. And we have one client who was not participating in any e-commerce whatsoever. They got punched in the mouth a year ago and flipped the store on with us in June of last year and said, why is it not working? And we had to let them know that there were 4 competitors who got very, very lucky. We will tell you, they had built out an incredible strong online presence, online branding 3 to 4 years earlier. So when March 15th of 2020 happened, they were just there to drink it all in. They had our customer had to play catch up for a while. Now we're driving that, and they've expanded their team, brought some really smart e-com people on board, and they're recognizing they have to drive their ROAS down a little bit to drive long-term awareness. And that's the black art of what we do. The platform allows our team to have the information to make those decisions and share that with the customer. But that's a really important part of keeping those network metrics simple. And as Lindsay described, when you learn what works in Dallas, you can probably apply that to Orlando with some nuances. So every time, Tyler's doing this all over the country, he's got brands, and so does Lindsay. I would say 70 to 80% of the learnings apply across most locations, but those 20 to 30% is where the real magic happens. I don't know, Tyler, you want to add to that at all?
No, yeah, I think that's a great point. In most cases, if you're selling the same product, those learnings can be adapted across the country, but there are those nuances in each individual local market. I can think of a great example of this, kind of to what Lindsay was saying earlier. We run a display consideration campaign for a big franchise that I work with. In 95% of the locations, it works extremely well, and it's one of their strongest, lead generating channels. Mm-hmm. We launched it in one location that I thought it would work well. It did not. So we quickly diverted and found a better avenue. And kind of to Pete's point, we lowered our return on ad spend to improve our ROI over the long term. And it worked out. But in most cases, it can be applied across the network, but there are absolutely nuances, and that's where having that network effect really plays a good role.
Yeah, you can make more confident decisions about your initial campaign strategy based on the data we have, but there are times where you get thrown a curveball and you got to make an adjustment. That's great. All right, we've got a few minutes left. I want to bring up our last lesson learned from 10,000 campaigns, and let's see what we have here. So optimizing and piloting new tactics. Lindsay early in the presentation talked about a 4-location pest control company. What do you mean, Lindsay, when you're talking about a pilot and that optimization phase? What are the things we're looking for? And I think it's important for everyone to understand, what's the time frame of the learning? Is it 30, 60, 90 days? Kind of walk us through how you view that with our customers and get them to the point where they've learned enough to start really scaling.
Sure. So obviously, I hate to beat a dead horse here, but it's going to look different based on what industry you're in. I would say in most of them that we work with, number one, we would start working you know, from a brand or franchise level. And I think those that are able to exit the pilot program more quickly and really move forward with an ongoing program are ones that you know your customer, you know, you've done your market research, you know who your customer is, where they shop. And so we partner that back with our knowledge and our expertise and where to target these people and to be most efficient. I would say when we're looking at a timeline and kind of an idea of where to, you know, kind of measure here, you know, we've been successful. Here's now where we can start rolling this out to either additional locations or changing budgets or whatever the end goal is really based on what your customer life cycle looks like. For somebody who has maybe your customer buying cycle is only, you know, a month. Obviously, your pilot program will be much shorter than somebody who I've worked in industries where the buying cycle could be close to a year. So I would say probably on average, we like to say around 90 days to really get up and running from that pilot is a good rule of thumb, but it's going to vary slightly depending on the industry and that client buying cycle.
Yeah, I know, Lindsay, we've had some conversations. We say the first 30 days, we learn nothing, right? We get it up, we get it live, we start to kind of find our sea legs. At 60 days, we start to have some data that we can react to. We start to make some minor tuning and adjustments. And that 90 to 120 days is where we start to really ratchet up performance. And, you know, and I think we've had some customers where those first 30 days were shocking to all of us, right? We sat down and had a gut check and said, like to Tyler's point, we thought display would crush it, but we're learning a few things differently. We got to change our copy. We got to change the keywords, the ads we're going at. I mean, everything has to change. And that's where, you know, that when you have people like Tyler and Lindsay and our performance team at the table, they've seen just about everything. So if there's something new there, it's pretty unique, right? And those where those adjustments are made. You know, I just had a really interesting question come in here that said, is there a system size threshold? Or what's the point at which a franchise should start working with someone like us with our platform where that scale starts to become an impact? I think for us, it's probably around 10 locations where doing it yourself becomes pretty unbearable. And then the data starts to become relevant. I don't know, Tyler and Lindsay, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's where, you know, there comes a decision where you have to say, can we handle this internally? Or is it best to find somebody to help us out with this, where from an operational cost perspective, it makes the most sense. And in our previous history, that 10 is really the tipping point. It depends on your industry, but in most cases at 10, if you're looking at 10 individual campaigns with 10 individual locations, managing 10 different sets of ads for every single campaign, it becomes a lot, and there's a lot that can be missed. I can speak from personal experience. My dad is a small business owner, and he tried to run his own Google Ads campaign and was quickly overwhelmed at how much work it is. Yeah. You have to stay on top of it, and our technology in coordination with people allows us to do that. But I mean, he's a software engineer, smart guy, but he had a really tough time running his own ads campaign. So it's really just at what point does it become more beneficial to you, and it really is around that 10 location.
Yeah, and it's not just running it. What I found interesting, having created digital campaigns, the setup is a lot of work, right? Setting it up properly with the landing pages, the form fills, the call tracking takes a lot of work. What exhausted me, as you mentioned, Tyler, was tuning it, right? Once mechanically it might work, but when nothing converts, you realize something's wrong. It's my copy, the words on my budget. There's all sorts of variables, and when you tune one, it could impact others that you have to keep in mind. And that ongoing tuning was what really became exhausting to me. And our platform allows us to make an adjustment in one particular place and map it across all the locations. So everyone can benefit with one flip of a switch versus having to do it individually. That shared network effect that you talked about, Tyler, is so important. So, you know, I think we wanted to try to keep this thing in around 45 minutes. And I think we're there. I do have a couple more questions that will come in that I want to wrap this up with. So I'm gonna hit these with Tyler and Lindsay, and then we'll close it down. So one of the questions was, what's the biggest resistance you have encountered at a local franchisee to adopt a program like this if the network says we're going to do this? What's the biggest, you know, heisman that you get, and how do you answer it?
I can start. I would say just being in this right now. I mentioned we're working on launching a pilot right now for one of our partners, and I think one of the things that we hear goes back to that first slide where the local franchisee or dealer, depending on the network, is just they want to make sure they're heard. Even though the branding can say consistent and it's the same overall company and messaging, there are some nuances on that local level, and they take pride in their local businesses and want to make sure that, you know, there's some of that messaging there as well. You know, perhaps they support, you know, a local event and they want to make sure that they can put that into their campaign. Just little things like that go a long way in supporting some of that. So that's my top one. I don't know, Tyler, if you see something different.
Yeah, I would say it's, you know, just in some cases, making sure that they are doing this for their business and not doing it just because at the corporate level they're supposed to. You know, does it benefit them directly and not just the overall, you know, and we want both, and that's what we're here for. And it can be accomplished. And it's just overcoming that generality that, you know, this isn't a local agency or somebody that knows my business. And without that collective knowledge, you know, you may not be able to overcome that, but we are. You know, from a local level, we can get very niche and very quickly.
That's great. Those are good answers. The last question I have for the two of you, I'll tee up what I think the answer might be, and you guys can comment on it. So one of the questions that came in is, how do you view this digital ecosystem as part of a broader localized marketing strategy? And I can tell you, Lindsay and I have had some conversations with some customers who are dealing in a very challenged marketplace. What we have strongly suggested to them is this is only one part of it, right? So that the franchisees and the local dealers that we see that are being successful are really innovating offline as well. And here's what I mean by that. They're using their online presence to drive people to local events and things like we're doing right now, webinars, seminars, local areas where they're bringing in their targets and their experts and just having conversations with customers. So becoming their own subject matter expert in a marketplace. It has nothing to do with a form fill or a phone call or a lead. It's building awareness for them and their brand and their marketplace. So we talk about how to maybe run a campaign around a specific landing page, literally to say, hey, we're going to host a webinar on you know, pest control for Southeast Wisconsin in July when mosquito season is high, right? They're just positioning out and offering advice. So that's one of the things we would suggest is, you know, and another question that popped up that was interesting is how do we work with local agencies for local franchising? Tyler's got some great examples. We have one of his better customers had a traditional agency in place, and we've got a very tight partnership with them. They provide all the content, all the creative, all the branding, all the messaging. We're one part of that three-legged stool. And now they've come to us and said, geez, we have other customers that have multiple locations that we can't scale to. How do we partner? So if you have an agency you're dealing with that's traditional, we're happy to be the technology kind of platform and behind, you know, sitting behind that. So think about that as you drop off the webinar and try to build out your strategies going forward. Tyler, Lindsay, anything you might want to close with that you think might be insightful for the folks listening?
One thing I'd add just to tack on to your point you just made here, I don't know if there's a better source for data collection to identify who your customer really is. You know, digital captures so much that you can't get in other avenues. And a lot of our franchises that we work with today utilize the insights that they take from the digital program to apply across the board. So if they find that, you know, a certain phrase or verbiage works really, really well and is driving a lot of leads, perhaps they'll put that in a print ad that they have or run it through a TV ad. You know, that collective knowledge is difficult to get in any other channel. And you can use it to model a lot of your, you know, other forms or channels of advertising.
It's a great point, Tyler. We've had customers tell you that they're driving their entire traditional campaign based off the data you're providing them. It's a good point.
Right.
Lindsay, any closing thoughts from you?
I think you guys hit it off just well, just fine.
As Lindsay would, she would defer to one of us as usual. Well done. Well, we're very grateful for IFA allowing us to participate in Wednesday Wise. We've really enjoyed these this basically vehicle and hope to do more of them. So if you have questions, I'm gonna leave you with you know, another aspect of how you can reach us to learn more about this, and that is netsertive.com IFA. So we built a landing page that talks about the information we shared in this webinar. Questions like what are CTV, metrics, all that information can be there, and you can also touch base with myself, Lindsay, or Tyler, or one of our crack team and potentially learn more if you'd like to. So again, we're grateful for the time and hope everybody has a wonderful Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for your time today, Pete, Tyler, and Lindsay. Have a great day.
All right, talk to you later. Thanks, Caitlin. Bye-bye.
Bye.